The Indus River, a lifeline for millions, a source of life and prosperity, but also a point of contention between two nuclear-armed neighbors, India and Pakistan. For over 6 decades, a fragile peace has been maintained by a treaty governing the sharing of this vital resource. This is the story of the Indus Waters Treaty, a pact now teetering on the brink. The Indus River, originating in the Tibetan Plateau, flows through India and Pakistan before emptying into the Arabian Sea. Its tributaries, the Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas and Sutlej, form a complex network vital for irrigation and drinking water for a vast population. The history of the Indus Basin is intertwined with the history of its people, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations for millennia. The partition of British India in 1947 led to the creation of India and Pakistan. This division also sliced through the Indus Basin, leaving the newly formed nations entangled in a struggle for control over the river's precious waters. The initial years were marked by disputes and uncertainty, threatening the livelihoods of millions who depended on the Indus for their survival. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, India and Pakistan, with the assistance of the World Bank, signed the Indus Waters Treaty in 1960. This landmark agreement aimed to bring an end to the conflict and ensure a fair and equitable distribution of the Indus waters. It was a testament to the power of dialogue and cooperation, even amidst deep-rooted tensions. The Indus Waters Treaty, a marvel of engineering and diplomacy, meticulously divided the 6 rivers of the Indus system between the two countries. Under this agreement, the 3 western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, were largely allocated to Pakistan. This ensured the country, heavily reliant on agriculture, received the majority of the water flow. India, in turn, was granted control over the 3 eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej. The treaty recognized the existing uses of the rivers and allowed for future development projects, subject to specific conditions. This balanced approach aimed to cater to the needs of both nations. A permanent Indus Commission, comprising commissioners from both countries, was established to oversee the treaty's implementation. This commission was tasked with facilitating cooperation, resolving disputes, and ensuring the treaty's provisions were upheld. For decades, it served as a vital platform for dialogue and conflict resolution. The treaty, hailed as a model for transboundary water sharing, brought a period of relative stability to the region. It allowed India and Pakistan to focus on their respective development goals, knowing that their water security was, to a large extent, guaranteed. The Indus Waters Treaty became a symbol of hope, demonstrating that even the most complex disputes could be resolved through dialogue and mutual respect. The year 2025 marked a turning point in the history of the Indus Waters Treaty. Citing a series of provocations and unmet demands, India took the unprecedented step of suspending the treaty, plunging the future of the Indus Basin into uncertainty. This decision, stemming from a complex web of political and strategic calculations, sent shockwaves across the region and beyond. At the heart of India's decision lay the issue of cross-border terrorism. India accused Pakistan of harboring and supporting militant groups operating in the Kashmir region. The April 22, 2025 attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, attributed to the Lashkar-e-Taiba, proved to be a tipping point. India argued that Pakistan's continued support for such groups constituted a material breach of the treaty's spirit, which called for mutual trust and cooperation. India also sought a renegotiation of the treaty, arguing that the provisions agreed upon in 1960 no longer reflected the current realities. India pointed to its growing population, increasing water demands, and the need for clean energy development as factors necessitating a revision. The government argued that the existing treaty unfairly restricted its ability to utilize its share of the Indus waters. Despite repeated attempts to engage Pakistan in bilateral talks to address its concerns, India claimed its efforts were met with resistance and delay tactics. This perceived lack of cooperation further fueled India's frustration, leading it to believe that the only way to force Pakistan to address its concerns was to take decisive action. The suspension of the treaty, therefore, was as much about sending a strong message to Pakistan as it was about securing India's own interests. Section 4. Pakistan's plight. A nation facing thirst. The suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty sent shockwaves through Pakistan, a nation heavily reliant on the Indus River for its survival. With the specter of water scarcity looming large, the Pakistani government condemned India's move as a hostile act, pushing the already volatile relationship between the two countries to a dangerous precipice. Pakistan, a predominantly agrarian economy, depends heavily on the Indus and its tributaries for irrigation. The suspension of the treaty threatened to disrupt water flow to vast swaths of agricultural land, particularly in the breadbasket provinces of Punjab and Sindh. This raised the alarming prospect of crop failures, food shortages, and economic devastation. Beyond agriculture, the treaty's suspension had severe implications for Pakistan's drinking water supply. Millions of Pakistanis, particularly in rural areas, rely on the Indus for their daily water needs. Disruptions to this vital lifeline could lead to widespread thirst, exacerbate existing sanitation challenges, and potentially trigger a humanitarian crisis. Faced with a water emergency, Pakistan accused India of weaponizing the Indus Waters Treaty, using it as a tool of political coercion. The government argued that India's actions violated international law and threatened the livelihoods of millions of innocent civilians. The suspension of the treaty, Pakistan argued, represented a dangerous escalation of tensions and could have catastrophic consequences for regional peace and stability. Section 5. India's perspective. Securing its own future. While Pakistan grappled with the immediate fallout of the treaty's suspension, India maintained that its actions were driven by a combination of national security concerns and the need to secure its own water future. The Indian government argued that its decision, while difficult, was necessary to protect its interests and force Pakistan to address its alleged support for terrorism. India pointed to its own growing water needs, driven by a burgeoning population and expanding industrial and agricultural sectors. The government argued that the Indus Waters Treaty, signed over 6 decades ago, no longer reflected the current realities and placed undue restrictions on India's ability to utilize its rightful share of the Indus waters for its own development needs. India also highlighted its investments in water management projects within its own territory, aiming to optimize water utilization and enhance its water security. The recently completed Shapakandi Dam on the Ravi River, for instance, was touted as a testament to India's commitment to responsible water management. This project, providing irrigation to thousands of hectares of land and generating 260 megawatts of power, showcased India's efforts to maximize the utilization of its allocated water resources. The suspension of the treaty, from India's perspective, was a calculated move to exert pressure on Pakistan to address its concerns. It was a signal that India was no longer willing to tolerate what it perceived as Pakistan's intransigence and was prepared to take bold steps to safeguard its own interests, even if it meant risking a diplomatic standoff. Section 6. Global Concerns. A Treaty on the Brink. The suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty sent ripples of concern across the international community. Observers warned that the escalating water dispute between India and Pakistan, both nuclear-armed nations with a history of conflict, had the potential to ignite a wider regional crisis. The international community recognized the treaty's critical role in maintaining peace and stability in South Asia and urged both sides to exercise restraint. The World Bank, which played a pivotal role in brokering the treaty in 1960, expressed its deep concern over the escalating situation. The bank, recognizing the treaty's significance for regional peace and stability, urged India and Pakistan to engage in dialogue and find a mutually acceptable solution. The organization offered its services as a mediator, hoping to facilitate a return to the negotiating table. Other international actors, including the United Nations and influential countries, echoed the World Bank's call for dialogue and de-escalation. They emphasized the need for India and Pakistan to uphold their commitments under the treaty and refrain from any actions that could further inflame tensions. The international community recognized that the Indus Waters Treaty was not just a bilateral agreement, but a cornerstone of regional stability, and its collapse would have far-reaching consequences. The global community watched with bated breath as the situation unfolded, acutely aware that the stakes were incredibly high. The future of the Indus Basin, and indeed the peace of South Asia, hung precariously in the balance, dependent on the willingness of India and Pakistan to step back from the brink and choose the path of dialogue and diplomacy.